So welcome everybody to this Talking Teen Services session. My name is Kate Bruner. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Youth and Family Services Principal Consultant at the Colorado State Library. And I will be your host for today. Talking Teen Services is a series of webinars and panel discussions hosted by the Colorado State Library on topics relevant to library professionals working with young people in their communities of service. This series and all of the Colorado State Library's youth services offerings are created by the librarians of the Youth and Family Services team at the State Library. And our staff positions and operating expenses are paid for by grant funding from the Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services, which allows us to provide them at no cost to you. So Caitlin is here today for this really great session that I'm super excited about, and I'm going to turn it over to her so she can introduce herself, and we will go from there. So Caitlin, welcome.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is the first webinar I have done in a while that is not just like a synchronous class. So I apologize if there's any technical things and it takes me a little bit. I'm going to share my screen now. So please let me know if there's anything weird. All right. So thank you for coming. Today we're going to be talking about preparing teens for college through academic library collaboration. My name is Caitlin Cook. I'm a teaching and learning librarian at the Auraria Library in Denver, Colorado. So the reason I'm doing this is because what I do is I teach information literacy classes. My focus is mostly on first year students, but that also includes high school groups that we host. So we bring in high school groups a lot of times with a special research project, and they come in and they get to use our services. We do a full like information literacy class with them. And so I'm going to go over kind of like what I do with that and why I think it's important. My background is also I've worked in public school and academic libraries. So I've been a teen librarian. I've also worked at a K through 12 where I was the secondary librarian, so the middle school and the high school. So my librarianship has generally been between for the ages of 12 to 19. I really enjoy that group. I think it's really important to get them in libraries, whatever kind of library it is. We want them in the library for a variety of reasons. I think because it makes them, like long library learners, life learners. They're better at, all that information literacy stuff, right? Finding information, using it well, um, you know, ethical use of information, all of that. A little bit about Auraria is that we serve three different universities. So we serve the Community College of Denver, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and then also CU Denver. So we also have, but like, we're a very diverse campus, and then we're also diverse in terms of like three different populations that we serve. We're also open to the public. So that allows us to have the high school groups come in, but it also allows those high school groups, if any of those individual students want to come back and use our resources later, they can do that. And I always try to let them know that so that if they're like, oh my gosh, I really need to come back and do this, that they are welcome to come. We are open on Sundays, so people can come and use our resources while they're on campus. All right. A little bit about just our goals for for today and how what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to provide an understanding of what a high school visit looks like to an academic library, how we do those, talk about why academic library visits are helpful, I think, for teens, share my lesson plan and the activities that I do for high school students, and then also share some example programs for preparing teens for college in the public library or the school library. But first, I would like to know a little bit about a little from you guys. So, like, what scared you about your first academic library experience? I have a Mentimeter open. So you guys can use the QR code or you can also use the code. And if you wouldn't mind answering that question for me, I'd just love to know a little bit about how you guys are thinking about academic libraries. I know to share my first experience, I walked into my first academic library as a first generation college student. I think I read a book in there that I brought in and then I left almost immediately. I did not talk to anybody. It was the biggest library I'd ever been to. Absolutely. I think the size is amazing. Library classification system. I took one look at that and I was like, I don't know what this is. And I did not ask any questions. Gigantic, scary doors. Absolutely. Um, and short-term loan fees for the UK. Okay. I did one of my master's degrees in the UK. I don't remember there being particularly short loan loans, but maybe yours was different. Navigating the stacks, I think, is really intimidating. Getting lost, absolutely. Yeah, nobody tells you that it's a different classification system. Not knowing who to ask to find materials. Yes. I think finding that front desk can be a little difficult. And also what desk, right? Sometimes there's a reference desk and a circulation desk. I certainly didn't have that understanding until I was working in libraries. We've got the size. Yeah, a lot of it's the classification system, right? It's really intimidating. Um, yeah, never used it until grad school. I didn't really use it until grad school either. Barriers to access due to disability. I, depending also, I think on the school, like if it's an older school, that's really, really difficult. But even ours is like, we have ramps, yes, but right in front of that ramp is also a grate. So I'm sure that's really useful for people trying to get in the library. Was really large. Would the librarians be nice? Yes. I think that's one of the big ones that's really intimidating. It was so much more serious than the high school library. Yes, I think so too. I think it feels, very academic. And that is absolutely part of the reason that we try to get people in and make them know that like it's very welcoming, right? We're not just we're we're not as intimidating as maybe it looks like. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for doing that. Um, that is the reason I did that was because it's one of the reasons that we like to have high school groups come in. I think it's really important for students to sort of get over that intimidation factor for academic libraries. I know it was a really big thing for me, from everybody I've talked to, and from all of your responses. Um, there's so many things that we're just not told about. And so just getting students in the library before they get to college so that when they step in it for the first time, they're like, hey, I have been in here. I know that I can ask questions. I know that the people are nice, hopefully. I mean, in my experience, they are librarians like questions. Um, and, like I know that like there's going to be a lot of books, and I know that there's going to be computers I can use, and I know that there's going to be people that I can ask questions to. All right. And then I'd also love to know what issues do you think most students have with the library as first year students? So like if you were going to predict the people that like the teens that you're working with, like what would you see them having the biggest issue with? Being overwhelmed and not knowing where to start. Yes. Um, which is like that library anxiety that I was just talking about. Absolutely. They don't know what a library can offer. I think we see that. I've seen that in frankly every library I've ever worked in, public, school, academic, where like getting students to know what they have access to is difficult. I certainly didn't know. I certainly did not utilize the resources that I should have. Feeling confident enough to ask questions, absolutely. Approaching staff and not wanting to feel stupid. Yes, that's huge. Being overwhelmed, not knowing where to start. Yes. Not understanding the Dewey Decimal System and what subjects are available. Yes, and also like if they do, right, if they do have an understanding of the Dewey Decimal System, how that translates to the Library of Congress classification system. Can they find the same things? Yes. Sometimes they ask really insightful questions, actually, the high school students about the classification system because they've like never heard of it before. And then we get to talk about classification systems, which I get to be nerdy about, and some of them are interested. When they should seek out the library in the process of a project or an essay. Yes, absolutely. When is the library actually available to them or they should start using it? In my area, the librarian is a mean old volunteer or someone's mom. Also, they aren't educated about the online resources. Yes. So knowing that like academic librarians what knowledge that they're going to have, um, struggling to find what they need, definitely narrowing down materials. Absolutely. We talk a lot about that. Understanding where they need to use academic sources. Yes, and what are academic sources, right? What's a peer-reviewed source? Some of them have to do that in high school, some of them don't. You know, they're all coming from very different backgrounds. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I love to see that just to, get a little bit of an idea of where your head is and also to see if we're on the same page, which we are. So that's nice. So these are why we host high school groups, right? Overcoming library anxiety, college preparedness, learning where to find help and what they have available. And then also, if we can, a little early introduction to like threshold concepts and information literacy at the college level. Because one of the things that I find with my first year college students is that they had wildly different expectations in high school. They're all coming from different high schools. Some of them had to do full-on regular citations. Some of them only had to leave a link. Some of them know what a peer-reviewed source and have read academic work before. Some of them have never had to find a source in their life. So, having that kind of like early introduction to the expectations of college, I think can be really helpful for students. So just a little bit about like what I do when they come in. So they come in the morning, I meet them in the library. We get to do a little intro about the library, kind of like what I did with you guys, just a little bit about me and about Auraria. It also includes things like where the bathrooms are and how to do printing, and don't leave your and not to leave their stuff everywhere. Mostly because we are open to the public, and so that is on them if their stuff is not there when they come back. And then we go over the agenda. I do what I call a library exploration activity, which I'm going to share with you today, which is a way for them to just kind of start to interact with the space. I make them talk to a student. And I actually think this is a great activity that anybody could use. I use it kind of as like an intro, but as a public librarian or a school librarian, if you could take a trip to a local academic library, this is something that you could certainly host. It's not something that requires, somebody who is working there to do. And then we get into kind of like the more information literacy stuff. We talk about source evaluation, how to find sources. That's the big one. Types of sources. And then they get a bunch of independent work time. So they're here all day. And I kind of get to, once I go through my class stuff, I get to help them find sources. And then I kind of like just check in with them for the rest of the day. But let me show you an example lesson plan. This was also shared, but I'm just going to go through it a little bit. And we do the library exploration activity, which is this is what it looks like. So this was inspired. I have an undergrad degree in anthropology. And if you've ever had to take a sociology or an anthropology class, you end up having to do an ethnography. And I was actually listening to a lot of stuff about like active learning, putting like like a lot of webinars, like putting the cognitive load on the students. And I was dealing with a lot of, it's hard to do a library intro that is not boring. So like something to keep students engaged, that they are going to learn, that they're going to get comfortable with the space. and also not fall asleep. So I came up with this inspired through like ethnography work for them to kind of go around, observe the library for a couple minutes. They have to write down their observations. They have to write down some of their conclusions about those observations. I have recently added the fact that they have to go look at a book because I found that they weren't doing that. And I want them to be like be introduced to the cataloging system and make an observation about it so that we can talk about it. And and then they have to actually ask a student in the library a question about how they use the library and what their favorite thing to do in the library is. I find that an unfortunate amount of them don't use our website. They come in and they use our space, which is wonderful. We want them to use our space, but we also want them to be using our resources online. But by doing this, this is one of the things that I found out, which was great. And then I have them come back. I want them to take a minute and think about their observations and think about a couple of ways that they would like to use the library or already use a library. And then as a table, or like in groups between like sometimes I do it in pairs, sometimes I do as a table, sometimes I do it in groups of like threes or fours. It depends on how many students I have. And I make them talk to each other, share their observations, and then they have to come to two conclusions together. And then they have to think about a couple of ways that they actually can gather information through the library. Um, there's an abundance of ways that they can find information through the library. Um, and so this also allows me to guide them if they like don't get there, because after I have them do this, we go through everything and we have a discussion. Sometimes I have them draw maps of the library just so like they're thinking about it in a different way. And depending on the group that I have, if I'm doing first year students, then I'm trying to get them familiar with our library so that they come back. With high school groups, I don't generally do the map. But it is a fun, if I had the time, I probably would, just because it's a fun way for them to like think a little bit differently, um, and like try to think about like how they would utilize the space. And that is the library exploration activity. As I said, you guys are welcome to I believe this has been shared, so you're welcome to copy this, change it as you like. What's great about like going through the conversations with this is it allows me to really guide students in different ways if I find sometimes they come up with wonderful things that I've never thought of, which is awesome, especially the high school students. You can get into some really interesting conversations about their observations about how we have laid out the library, which is cool. They tend to be really good about being like, oh, like you did this. So like there's a quiet space and you did this so that people can work in groups. And I'm like, thank you for noticing. We really try. Um, and then we can also like have students like I can guide them if they're like kind of not getting something that I want, or I need them to like go in a certain direction. That allows me a lot of wiggle room, and anybody a lot of wiggle room if they want to use this. So after I do that, I do talk about why research is different, how research is different in college. I actually had a teacher come in and be like, would you mind going over some of this stuff? Because she's like, I can say it until I'm blue in the face, but students, don't believe me. And I do think it's helpful to have as many people as possible kind of talk about this, but also as somebody who is coming in kind of, I'm new and I'm shiny, and they tend to listen to me because I'm coming from a college perspective. So we talk about how, like, most papers are research papers, and that's just not the case in high school. A lot of times they get a lot more creative space, and that's not probably not going to happen unless they're creative writing majors, right? And then the professors are already going to assume that they can find, evaluate, and cite sources. So there's not a lot of extra help often. Sometimes you're lucky and you have a class early on that really walks you through those things, but not always. And especially if you took some AP classes and you're skipping those classes, you're certainly going to have that expectation at a higher level. And then professors are not required to remind you of deadlines or to give you extensions. This is a hard one for students to learn. I think they're very, very used to in high school, kind of everything's up for negotiation a little bit. and your teachers know you really well. They're willing to work with you. They're also required to work with you to a certain degree that professors are not. And so I like to remind students that, I can see you, all of your professors can see you. And if you've been on your computer the whole time and not taking notes, I know it. If you have slept through a couple of my classes, I would know it. If you haven't shown up to a lot of the classes, I know it. And then if you try to ask for extensions, I may or may not say yes. They're not required to. It's up to them. It's their own little kingdom. And then along with that, there's no consistency. So like I always try to remind them, like in high school, they get a lot of, like teachers work together so that like they're not doing all their big projects at one time. That's not the case in university. Professors don't know what other professors are doing. They certainly don't know what other classes you have. And most of them don't care. Um, if you get lucky, maybe somebody is willing to move something a little bit for you, but probably not. And so they have to be the ones to figure out how to do that. And then also, in terms of expectations, vary wildly across classes. Some classes are going to be really big on citations, some are not. That's totally up to the professor, and sometimes it's up to the department. And also the citation that they use, totally up to them. So they're going to have to jump between MLA and APA and Chicago, depending on like, once again, their department and their class that they're taking. And then I always like to say this at the end, just because I think it's really hard for students to get behind, is that when in doubt, cite it. When you're writing a research paper, almost everything that you're writing is coming from another source, and you need to cite it. I know that's something that was really hard for me to learn. Um, I always thought I had to put like my twist on everything, and like come up with like original thought all of the time. And that really only has a place in the in the conclusion. And so all of the rest of it is just building an argument. And so you have to cite all of those things. So that's just a little bit about how things that I go over with them. I go over evaluating sources, finding sources, what a peer-reviewed scholarly source is, start my research. We go over Boolean operators, always a fun one. I do touch on Google Scholar because I think it's useful to use several different search engines for finding research, but also this is something they can use when they go home. In our case, I have to go over like how they can download sources so they can use them later, and then also that they can come back to the library. And if they want, they can print things. Most of them just want to like download it into a PDF on their computer or put it in Google in some way. And then they get a bunch of work time, and I get to walk around and talk to students, which is a really fun thing for me to get what like they're doing their research on, what they're interested in, and help them kind of like develop keywords for searching. I think that's one of the hardest things for students to wrap their heads around is sort of like not only you finding a keyword, but then you have to find the right keyword. And I think that's hard. Like now when I do it, if somebody tells me I can kind of know right off the bat. I'm like, ooh, that's going to work or that's not going to work. But that's because I do this all the time. When you're first doing it, you have no idea what word is going to work and what's not going to work. And telling them that it's a tedious process, that they're going to have to try a bunch of different words as they go through, and they're not going to find things within an hour, maybe. It's going to take a couple of days and maybe a couple of weeks to find really good research and to use a bunch of different keywords and see what works and what doesn't. And that tend to works better one-on-one, I find, when I get to walk around and like and talk to them. So that is what that looks like for when students come in and the things that I go over and what I think is useful. I also want to talk a little bit about why I think collaboration between libraries is really useful and what I get out of it, and I think what the schools get out of it. I think the big one is shared resources that they can come in. We pay for these resources anyways. I know as a librarian, I want as many people as possible to have access to these great resources that we have, and especially academic resources are not easily available, right? You have some through the public library, you have some through the school library, but academic libraries are really like the houses for that academic information. And so I want as many people as possible to have access to that. I know when I left school, it was one of the things that was difficult to be like, oh no, I don't have this anymore. Like, what? Um, and so just letting people know that they can come in whenever they want and use our resources on campus, I think is really important. Um, and I think that's true between like public and school as well. They have different things available to them most of the time. And so I think you can work together to kind of like help students be able to use both as much as possible. One of the things that we did while I was a public librarian was the middle school near us, we started to let them use their student IDs as library cards. So when they did have projects, right, they didn't have to bring in a parent. And like make a library account to sort of use our resources online or check out our books. They could just come in and they were already in our system, and that just made that process so much smoother. Um, I will say getting that up and running was not easy. And it was a lot of technical stuff that, I mean, that part wasn't on me, but it was a lot of trying to figure out how to do it with batch uploads and all that fun stuff. But fortunately, that wasn't my part. I just got to see the students and help the students. I also think libraries and librarians learning from one another. I learn a lot when I have the high school groups come in. I get to see what students are doing, what's normal for them, kind of like like I have expectations for like the next group of students that are coming in. I get to talk to their librarians and their teachers and just sort of see like what they're learning, what trends they're seeing, what weird things students are into now that I may or like that I'm not really aware of. And like that's really useful for me when I'm teaching first year students. And then on their side, they also get to talk to me and reach out and be like, what are the expectations, right? What do I need to be getting, where do I need my students to be when they graduate? And that's something that I used to do as a high school librarian, is go and observe some academic librarians teach to make sure that like, hey, I'm doing things that make sense, right? I'm not teaching them things that they don't need to know. Um, and also that like I'm getting them where they need to be by the time they get there. And last but not least, but shared expertise. We all have different kinds of experience in libraries. Um, and having worked in like all three of those, I can say that, you know, for me, as now that I'm in an academic library, I'd really love to partner with more public libraries with their expertise with programming. We just, especially the kind of library we are, where we serve three different um, universities, and we have all of them we're one of the only like like tri-institutional um, buildings on campus. And so I would love to utilize a lot of that programming to kind of start to build and foster that like welcoming community that public libraries do really well. And academic libraries have historically not. And we're working on it. But I think sharing that kind of expertise is really useful. I also, when I was at the public library, I had already done some community college teaching when I was working there. And so I went over to the high school and I worked with some of the English teachers to come in and I did a class on literature reviews, for instance, and did some information literacy classes. Um, and so I think just being able to kind of share those expertise is wonderful because we all have different focuses, but we all want people to, you know, be happy in libraries, to use the information that they have, and to meet all those diverse needs, which is what this quote is about. And I love this quote. Collaboration is an integral part of providing library services to a community in order to meet the diverse needs of the public being served and to foster lifelong learning of patrons of all education levels. And that's, I think, really what we all want as librarians. And I think working together really allows us to do that so much better than when we're isolated in little silos. Okay, so I would love to hear from you guys, ideally, how you would like to work with an academic library. Or maybe like how you have worked with an academic library if you have done anything like that in the past. Yeah, I think field trip tours is a great way to do it. Um, Especially because I think it gets tricky when you're like coming to, um, like transporting people, but if they can get there themselves, for us, like a lot of the high schools come on public transport, because buses are complicated sometimes. We do have buses, that have come, but it's difficult. I'm an academic librarian. I have a hard time garnering interest from high school teachers. Oh, that's so fascinating. Um, If you would like to reach out, I can talk to you a little bit about how we do it. Most of the time, it's like people that have just done it every year and they come back and then they tell other people. But we've also done some like panels with them. And I think that also helps like garner that interest. I would like to help teens in my area apply for college and feel confident in doing so. Absolutely. Yes, using and sharing resources that the public library doesn't have. Wonderful. I think it's a great idea to have academic librarians come into the high school and talk to seniors about it. I think that's like another way to kind of like flip it because buses are complicated. Absolutely. Yes, and I think like as a public librarian, I think it can be difficult to arrange like something like a field trip, um, but something if like there's one close enough where people can meet there, and or having somebody come in and do a talk, I think is also useful. Okay, and so the local high school doesn't have a library, trying to make them your library. I think that's wonderful. And hopefully I think a lot of it times it's the admin is trying to get it through the admin. That's difficult there. But I grew up in California and we didn't have libraries for my elementary or my middle school. And so for elementary, that's often how it works is like there's a local library close by and they do all of the school library things. Okay. And so academic librarian, the high school tours are mostly come in and here's the library. I think that's great. I think getting them in the door, getting them comfortable, I think that's huge. Um, yes, inviting an academic librarian to a tag meeting is wonderful. Hosting an after school program with a local library, like local academic library. Awesome. These are all great. How can the state library facilitate our public libraries getting in touch with the right folks at our universities and community colleges? I don't know. But what I would recommend is email. I mean, like, so what I did as a school librarian is I just emailed a lot of academic librarians to get in touch with them. A lot of them didn't reply, but a couple of them did. And so I just talked to the ones that were willing to work with me. And also sometimes like we have a form people can fill out like through our website. So there might be something like that available. I'd like to help ease the transition from high school to college for teens, for sure. I don't have a local academic library, but what would be asking in-state academic? Oh, I think that's great. Yeah, having a Zoom session. Um, I think that's awesome. What a great idea. Yes, sharing cool archival spaces. Absolutely. Um, so we do have a small like special collections or archive, and I think students always find that really interesting. Unfortunately, it's not like super accessible, but I think other universities have really cool and interesting spaces where they do like exhibits and stuff, and what a wonderful thing for students to get to see. And like, yes, scheduling academic libraries to do workshops and things like that, 100%. Those are all really cool. Thank you for sharing. And I apologize that I'm going back and forth. I did try to figure out how to get Mentimeter into Google Slides, and it was beyond my coding capabilities. Um, so if you can't get into the public library, I'd also like to talk about a couple of things, just some research I did and stuff that I have hosted for like how to prepare students for college. So I was very lucky as a teen librarian that I had somebody come in the library that was like, I just moved here, and I used to be a like she used to do consultations for college, right? For students. And so she hadn't built up that business yet. And so she was like, hey, do you want to do like some workshops with me? And I was like, absolutely. So we did essay writing workshops and college application workshops. The first time we did it, we didn't get a great turnout. But then I started um, putting it in the newsletter for the local high schools. And that worked a lot better because that's how the adults see them. So a lot of times we'd have families come in to do the college application stuff, and then the parents would send their students to do the essay writing workshop, which worked really well. She was also willing to do kind of like some drop-in hours with them to come in and talk. Um, and she was wonderful. So like I highly recommend anything like that. I think the essay writing workshop was really, really helpful, and that was kind of her specialty. Um, and just having students being able to have that kind of help, I know I would have appreciated it, and it was free, which is awesome. Um, I also found there's a number of libraries that are doing like scholarship workshops, which is awesome. Um, Here is one of them. So this is the Bellevue Public Library, but they host scholarship workshops where students can come and like find out where to find scholarships, which like I know I certainly didn't know how to do, and would have been really, really wonderful at the time. And then I also found a number that do some test prep stuff. And this was interesting because it looks really different depending on the library. Some of them have a lot of online resources, and that's how my prior public library was, is we had a lot of things that people could kind of do on their own and asynchronously, which I think is wonderful. But some have like, a full class for it. I also think that pairing those things is really helpful. If you can use like having a class on how to use the online resources and why they're beneficial, I think would be really helpful. And even if it's something like you host it through one of your regular programs, like if you have somebody said they had like a tag group, or I know some libraries host like homeschool groups or anything like that that's kind of like a regular meetup. I think it would be really nice. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Um, College coaching consultations, having anybody come in and do regular consultations if they can have that. A number of libraries I looked at had did this in a variety of ways. Some of it was one-on-one. Some of them it was like a whole program that they do, um, where like, and they have volunteers and librarians and they train them. Um, and so like it looked very different depending on the library. But I think having just the opportunity for students to be able to come in and talk to somebody about how to apply for college, whether that's a workshop or a coach or a one-on-one session, is so useful. And then this one I thought was really cool, which is not something I had thought about before, but a lot of libraries do career guidance, and expanding that into teens for college prep, I think is really cool. This was one of the ones that I looked at. So like this is the annual teen college and career fair, um, where people come in and they can talk to a bunch of different people and a bunch of different um, like either like from a program or that like they're representatives of a company. Um, and I think this is great because like as we all know, college is really expensive, and maybe that's not the only route. And if you do want to go to college, also like, what's the purpose? Having that kind of intention um, is useful, I think, for students, not only to get into college, but to stay into college um, and complete it. And also, you know, I don't want to say waste money, but like I would certainly do it differently if I was starting college now with the knowledge that I have. And then last but not least, panel discussions about college experiences I think are great. I personally have like I've been like a bunch of different kinds of students. I was a first generation college student. I was a community college student. I was a transfer student. One of my master's degrees is from England, so I was an international student. My second master's degree was an online, so I've done an online thing. And I like to share that with the high schoolers. So if they have any of those questions about like how do you apply to an international school? How do you even look at that, right? How does it function to do online school? Most of them have that experience at least a little bit now, but online college looks really different. And also sometimes it's synchronous, sometimes it's asynchronous. Um, and so I like to share that with them just so that they know that there's a bunch of different options. And also, you can start at a four-year college and then go to a community college and then go to another four-year college. That's what I did. And you can transfer 2 to 3 times if you need to. I don't recommend it, but you can. And so just like I think them hearing the variety of experiences from people and also types of schools, right? State school, liberal arts school, private school, public school, so that they know how many things are available to them is just really wonderful. All right. So we talked about this a little bit. If anybody would like to share something that they have done, so that you guys can share with each other wonderful ideas about things that you have already done in your libraries, I would love to hear it, and I'm sure everybody else would love to get more ideas. And this is the last one, I promise. Having a program about how to select college. Awesome. Oh, and talk to about college financing. That's wonderful. And help students with their research papers, like dual credit classes. Yeah, test prep. Wonderful. The scavenger hunt in the academic library. Yes. Yes. Getting some input from college professors and librarians about what they're seeing people struggle with. Absolutely. Oh, cool. I have not heard of Brain Fuse. College help, job and resume, homework help. That sounds great. Outreaches to AP students about information literacy resources. Awesome. And a teen job fair. Nice. Welcome to college, first semesters. Here how to adult books for incoming freshmen. That is great. Yeah, partnering with the chair of the English department. I mean, I love a teen book club. I think that's an awesome way to like get to know them and get them using all of the stuff. Just getting buy-in from teachers would be amazing. Yeah. Oh, cool. And you do chat reference for the dual credit students. Nice. Yeah, that is great. So like the high school students came in to use the resources. That's awesome. All right. It looks like we have about 10 minutes left, so I will go to questions.
Caitlin, some people in the chat, there was a request in the chat, if you could capture those Menti responses in some way, and maybe we could send those out with the recording as well, especially like the idea sharing piece. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. I will I'll figure out how to do that best. I don't know. It might just be a picture, and I apologize if
that'll work
that's what it ends
too,
up
right?
being.
Yeah, yeah, we'll figure it out. But if
Yeah,
there's a way to yeah, capture those, I think people would love to have a chance to hang on
there are
to.
some wonderful, wonderful ideas in there.
Yeah, yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Caitlin in particular, either from your school library or public library perspective about building a relationship with academic library and getting in touch with an academic librarian to help generate some ideas or explore possibilities? Yeah, it's always good to know. There, comment in the chat. It's good to see that there are others going through the same struggle and have the same dreams, so to speak. So I will feel less awkward about reaching out. So yeah, Caitlin, could you maybe like speak to that whole like connecting with an academic librarian piece?
I
Like, do
think
you have any
like
tips for like reaching out to successfully initiate and start building that relationship?
um like as I said previously, like when I was a school librarian, I tried to reach out and I really just emailed as many people as possible. Um, I will say like beginning of the term is probably not the easiest time because people are just really busy. Um, and I think it's just about hitting people at the right time. And also if like they already have something like this going, so they have somebody that is like happy to do it, that makes it easier. But I would also recommend like going into the library and talking to somebody.
Mm.
Um, if nobody's coming, like if nobody like reaches back out, or talking to somebody who might have a connection, right? So like one of the things was one of the students, sorry, not students, one of the teachers, her husband worked at one of the colleges, and so I had emailed them, but they hadn't gotten back to me. But through him, I got like they emailed me, and so I got to connect with them. So just utilizing as many of those connections as possible. Because yeah, I don't think there's one correct way, and also just it is awkward.
Yeah, cold emailing or cold calling is a thing, right?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is just what it is. But I think librarians in general, I think we're all very like my experiences we're very friendly people. We like to help if we can. And so once you get in contact, like even if somebody can't help, they'll often be like, okay, let's see what we can do to help you.
Could you share also a little bit more info about how you engage with high schoolers? Like, so you shared the lesson plan and the activity, but like when you're engaging with them in particular, like what does that look like? And then how are you connecting with them in the first place to get them like to come do a library visit?
Okay, so for us, a lot of the high schoolers that come, um, they've been coming for quite some time, so they do it every year, um, and so it's just part of their thing. Um, but also, I believe it was last year, it might have been the year before. I did have actually like a librarian from one of the school districts near us reach out, and they did a panel of academic librarians to come and talk to the high school librarians. Um, And that was also a way for us to connect and for me to let them know that they can come and do this. Um, and so that was useful. And that has happened. I was talking to one of my coworkers, and that had happened before. So I don't know. I don't think they do it every year, but they do it like every once in a while. And so that's just a nice way for us to connect. Um, and I think also like at least here in Denver, I feel like library world is fairly small. And so like I know a number of people that work at other academic libraries that work at the public library that and I know people that know people. Um, and so sometimes it's just about also like utilizing those resources to be like, hey, I know you know somebody that works at DPL that works with teens, and I was thinking about doing this thing. Can I, can you like make an email introduction for me? Or do you think that they would mind if I just like email like just emailed them and dropped your name?
Yeah, so kind of building that bridge from both directions, like public librarians and school librarians could reach out to the academic library, but also I think we have some academic folks in the room, so like you could go the other way as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like sometimes I've had people be confused about why I'm reaching out. They're like, what do you mean? You want to come to the high school and teach information literacy sessions? And so sometimes it takes some explaining too about like why it's useful or important. Um, and I think once you get there, once you're like, I can help support you in this way, they're like, oh, cool. Um, but like sometimes people just don't know exactly what we do or what we can offer.
Yeah, and it sounds like sometimes like just being patient and finding the right person to connect with is sometimes like you you may not
Yes.
hit the right person, like no matter which type of library you are in and what type of library you're reaching out to connect with someone, sometimes you're just gonna have to stay patient and keep trying. It sounds
Yeah. If
like
it's
you've
not the
had
first
that experience.
person, talk to the next person. And if they have an outreach librarian, they're a great person to talk to. Um, I have found outreach librarians generally, even if it doesn't end up being with them, they're like, we want to do as many things as possible. We want to get people in here. We want to connect. And so they, even if it's like them getting you in contact with somebody else, they're a very useful source.
Yeah, I imagine sometimes it's like you're saying, reaching out to an academic librarian at the beginning of the term might not be ideal. Like sometimes maybe the timing, like I wonder about reaching out to public librarians in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
all
I
eyeball
mean,
deep
like
in
that
the
would
summer
be, it would
programming,
be
right? Yeah,
exactly. That would
getting
be
a little
crazy
tricky.
during
But
summer reason. It's like, I don't have time to tie my shoes.
right. Yeah, I think I think someone is interested in, they have teachers and librarians who don't know, what they have to offer in their academic library. And so um, just a little bit of frustration around any time offered as a resource, they haven't heard back. So hence why I'm asking about, if you have any particular strategies to success, it's like for that. So thank you for sharing those. So, any other questions anyone has? We could probably take one more question. I'll pause just for a second.
I can stop sharing.
Always gives people a minute to write something in the chat if they need to. Okay. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much for coming today and for just so generously offering us your time and your energy and your experience. And thank you everyone for engaging in the chat today and for asking some questions. So I hope everyone is leaving this session with at least one action you think you can take and apply from your learning from this session. Research into adult learning tells us that if we apply even one piece of our learning to our practice as soon as possible, we are much more likely to retain that learning long term. So get out there and do the thing. And as a reminder, we will make the recording link available on librarieslearn.org on the event page and email everyone the session materials who registered. If you're interested in the whole Talking Teen Services session or oh, excuse me, the whole Talking Teen Services series, you can actually access that on the Colorado State Library's YouTube channel, and I will link the playlist for you. That is also where you'll find the recording eventually from this session too. So, and our final ask today, if you would, is to please complete this session survey for us, and I will link that again in the chat as well. There you go. And like I said, we use these surveys a couple of different ways, and you'll notice that the date and the presenters and names and the name of the session are already pre-filled for you, so you don't have to remember the title of the session. And we take this quantitative survey data and we use it when we write our reports for our federal funder. And like I said, we read every survey. So please share any feedback you have for us on this session, things you'd like to see in the future. That'll help us improve and diversify our training offerings, especially when it comes to teen services. So I deeply, deeply appreciate everyone's time and the thought everyone puts into those surveys and the thought everyone put into your shares in the chat. And take care of yourselves and each other. And I hope everyone has a great start to the school year and fall programming and all of the things that are happening in all of your libraries. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.